What did we learn at the 2023 NFL Scouting Combine? We're talking about all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Dynasty.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Matt Williamson and Ryan McDowell.
Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. We're free and available on all platforms. Welcome to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. How's it going today, Matt?
It's going really well. How about you?
Going well. We got to hang out a little bit last weekend at the Combine. We talked about that leading into the week that we were looking forward to that for a lot of reasons, and it was a great week, a great weekend for me, and it did not disappoint. We saw lots of impressive performances, heard lots of interesting interviews, and I know you spent your week really, of course, focused on the Steelers. How was the week for you? Did you learn anything? Did you hear any whispers? Tell us a little bit about it.
Not as much as you would think, I would say. I had heard, a big thing was the Jets were really focused on Aaron Rodgers, and their fallback plan was going to be Carr, which is not a fallback plan anymore. And then Jimmy's a fallback plan from there. But that's three big different tiers, obviously. I wouldn't say there was a ton of scuttlebutt or, little nuggets I picked up, but it was just great seeing a lot of people, including your lovely face as well. I mean, we had a lot of cool interviews on with us as well at the Steelers table, Radio Row. Had a lot of good meals and saw some people I don't get to see nearly enough. So it's one of my favorite weeks of the year. It's a blast.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly saw some standout performances on the field, in the drills, on the 40, really all of those things.
Testing.
We saw some players really stand out, and it feels like Anthony Richardson is kind of the story of the Combine from a fantasy dynasty standpoint. I've kind of been saving him and really most of those quarterbacks. Of course, we've been doing our rookie profiles now for a few weeks, and I really was waiting to see how the Combine would go. So later in the show, we're going to be talking more about Anthony Richardson. We'll share our thoughts on him. But instead, let's focus on really quickly just a couple of the other players that impressed. Matt, I know you were kind of handcuffed to those headphones and to the radio for much of the time. So you didn't get to you didn't have the same experience as a lot of the media there. But what did you see that really impressed you from one of those dynasty relevant? Let's stick to those quarterbacks, pass catchers, running backs. What kind of stood out for you?
Well, if we do kind of a broad brush strokes, I would say this tight end class is phenomenal, and it keeps getting better and better. The more homework I do, the more information we get, the numbers that came out. I'm really impressed with the tight end class at the top all the way through. I think 3 years from now, we might be like, man, there were 9 starters in that class that end up being NFL starters. And I think the running back class rivals it. I've just put together my top 5 running backs for Steelers.com, a series we're doing. And it was really hard to narrow it down to 5. I mean, that 4th and 5th spot, there was maybe 8 or 9 guys that could have qualified. So a lot to pick from there. I'm not real impressed with the receiver class at the top, but I will say Smith-Njigba was phenomenal and is clearly my number 1 receiver now. And then there were some day 2, early day 3 receivers I think improved their stock, and maybe it's just me getting more familiar with them. I'm sure, of course, we're going to talk about Richardson for much of the show, but those 4 quarterbacks all held their own as well, or more.
Yeah, or more. Absolutely. The quarterback's impressed. I had said leading up to the Combine, we knew Bijan was RB1.
Right.
But quarterback was crowded and messy with those 4 guys. Didn't necessarily know who would ultimately end up being the quarterback 1 for fantasy or for the NFL draft. We could say the same at the tight end spot, say the same at the wide receiver spot. Mm-hmm. And we didn't get a ton of clarity, in my opinion. I think you can still make an argument at tight end and at quarterback for 3 or 4 different options at each position. But you kind of hit on it. I think we got some clarity at wide receiver, and I think it is Jackson Smith and Jigba is separating himself from the pack. I think he's the pretty clear wide receiver 1 right now, both in fantasy and I would expect in the NFL draft as well.
Peacock and I were talking about this. I mean, even if he runs a 4.68, I really don't care. I mean, just his style of play. Keenan Allen was a 4.7 guy. And I'm not even projecting that, but he probably won't burn up the track. And the only negatives on the guy are he didn't play much last year. I'm not holding that against him because last he did play during the season, he was a dominant player. And his stuff, the way he plays just translates very quickly to the NFL too. Route runner, unbelievable agility drills. That's the kind of stuff I want to see. I mean, he projects to be a high target guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Just what we want to hear for a fantasy, from a fantasy standpoint. Mm-hmm. We have covered a lot of these rookies, including Smith and Jigba and several other standouts, but we also have a lot to go. We're going to keep hitting these rookie profiles all this week. We'll actually take a little bit of a break from the rookie talk next week because, we got free agency right around the corner. The legal tampering period, one of my favorite terms in football, that is next Monday and Tuesday. So this time next week, we'll start hearing the reports. They won't become official until Wednesday, next Wednesday. But it's going to be a wild week of free agency talk. And of course, the news is starting to roll in here over the past 24, 36 hours or so with players getting tagged, some trade talk with new players that maybe we hadn't heard mentioned before. So we'll kind of do a little bit of a roundup on that tomorrow, but we do want to stick to the rookie talk today. And like I said, Anthony Richardson stole the show in Indy. We knew he would, and I think he was even better than advertised. So that's going to be our focus of the rest of the show today. We'll get started on that right after this break.
Folks, it's midway through the NBA season, and it's now really the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained, whatever you're into. It just, build the perfect bet that you want. You can use player points, rebounds, assists, and of course, there's so many other sports you can bet on as well. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Matt, let's talk about Anthony Richardson. Of course, the quarterback from Florida, 6'4", 244 pounds, still just 21 years old. And before we get into any of the other information, including what we saw at the Combine this past weekend or this past week, Matt, pre-Combine, Richardson's kind of been a hot topic and a guy that was really polarizing, right? I mean, some were falling in love with the upside and the athleticism, the running ability, and others just were kind of stuck on that passing percentage and really how ugly some of those passes were this past season. Which side of that were you on pre-Combine? Were you a believer or were you staying away?
I would say for all 4 of these prospects, red flags were scaring me galore. I mean,
you're talking the 4 quarterbacks?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And including Richardson, maybe more than any. But I've told the story many times lately on the air because I think it really applies, is I was trained as a scout that, Matt, don't ever count on a quarterback getting more accurate at the NFL level. That just doesn't happen. And for years and years and years, it didn't. But now Dak, Lamar, Hurts, Allen, the last two to me are the best examples of guys that came in inaccurate, flat, especially Hurts and Allen. And now they still have their spells that they're not great, but they're more than adequate passers and sometimes even spectacular. And I think a big reason of it, this is just my theory on it, is all these quarterback coaches that are out there, the Jordan Palmers of the world, like biomechanics and things like that they didn't have 5-10 years ago. Hey, your plant foot's a little off, or you're not bending your front knee enough, or you're not transferring your weight, or whatever your biomechanical problem is. They diagnose it with a computer and specialists. And if you're willing to put the work in, you can change the way you throw the football and eliminate bad habits. So from what I understand, Richardson is a hard worker. He's conscientious. He wants to be great. He's not just going to blow it off. I don't know the young man. He might get millions in his pocket and say, I'm good, I'm not going to do that stuff. But all these guys have these private coaches now. And as bad as Hurts and especially Allen were at the beginning of their careers, I think there's a lot of room for optimism that he can become a good enough passer to be a starting quarterback in the league, which is all we care about. We don't need him to be a 75% completion guy. We just need him to be the starter. Because don't you think even right now he could mimic what Justin Fields did this past year? Because I think Justin Fields is a better passer than Richardson. But if they just did that formula his rookie season, wherever he lands, that would keep him on the field as he learns. And he probably would have a better supporting cast than Fields had to deal with Chicago yesterday.
Yeah, well, a couple of things there to respond to. It's funny you mentioned Fields because I heard some other mentions of Fields that some at the combine suggesting Justin Fields, what we saw from Fields this past season was Richardson's upside, and some suggesting that was his floor. So
I think it's more of his floor.
Right. And then the other thing that I thought back to just a couple weeks ago, there were comparisons out there of Anthony Richardson to Malik Willis. And so in a weekend, really, Richardson has gone from comps of Malik Willis to Justin Fields. So that's a pretty good move that he's made, and kind of represents the jump that he made at the combine. And again, we knew he was going to test well. We knew he was an athletic freak. We knew he was big, tall, strong, muscular, all those things. We knew all of that. The things that I did not know or that I had questions about were still his passing, just in general, not only accuracy, but really kind of all facets, and how he would do with the media in front of the, in the interview sessions. And we heard reports earlier in the week that he was really impressing in team interviews. Of course, that's not something any of us obviously have access to, but we have to take those reports for what they are. He captivated the crowd in the media room, Matt. He had a large crowd. He had the people around him, laughing and just obviously really interested in hanging on every word he said. Super well-spoken, confident, humble at the same time. Like he won me over in that interview session. And then once he got on the field, I was impressed with his throwing. I mean,
I think it's getting better.
Yeah, he certainly had a couple bad throws. Most of those quarterbacks did, probably other than CJ Stroud. But I hate to say it. I said it on the DLF Dynasty podcast this week too. I thought his passing was more impressive than my Wildcat guy, Will Levis. And, Will Levis said he had a cannon, and he does. We've seen him show off that arm in multiple games. He didn't show it off that much at the combine. I don't know why, but Richardson certainly did. So I'm feeling more and more confident with Anthony Richardson. And I don't think it's a case of double counting. Again, we knew he would be impressive in those drills, in that testing, and he was impressive all around at the NFL Combine.
Yeah, and you certainly can double count now. You know, I mean, give him credit for something you already did. But to me, it was, this is the example I used on Peacock and Williamson. It was like, I probably would have had a 93 out of 100 athletic grade on him. Now it's a 98. You know, you go from an A to an A+. You know, it doesn't mean you could still increase the stock you put in that, because really by any metric, especially when you talk about the height and weights and everything, this is the best testing combine any quarterback in the history of the combine has had. I mean, it's number one, better than Michael Vick, better than a lot of guys at Bus, better than a lot of unbelievably talented players. So the immensity of what he did can't be understated, but you know, it's also a little fresh on our mind. So we're probably all overreacting a little. But you also did mention my Steeler responsibilities while I was there. Well, 2 hours a day, I was on the air with Max Starks. And not everyone might not know who Max Starks was, but he was left tackle for the Steelers for a while. Yep. One of the biggest human beings I've ever seen. But anyways, Max is a great dude. But also Max is a graduate. He's a Gator. He's a Florida Gator. And stays very tuned in. He does a lot of college games. Stays very tuned in with his alma mater. And I asked him on the air, and I asked him late night, you know, with beers and hanging out, like, what's Richardson like? He's like, he's a great kid. You know, he's going to work hard. He's going to do the things you need to get better. You know, I mean, I don't know Anthony Richardson, but Max did, and totally vouches for him. So I'm like, great. You know, I mean, that's what I want to hear.
Yeah. The other thing in talking about Willis and Fields and concerns about these players as passers, what I think we're fairly confident, and not just fairly confident, very confident in at this point, is that Richardson is going to be an early first round NFL draft pick. So he's going to have that draft capital that gives him a long leash. So if he comes to the league and struggles as a passer, as we've seen many other quarterbacks do, Josh Allen, Fields, and Hurts, and many others, he's got that draft capital that is going to keep earning him chances and keep earning him playing time. So that leash is going to be a long one with a guy like Anthony Richardson. That's another reason I think we are safe to invest in him. I agree. Let's take a step back and cover some of the basics here. Richardson was a 4-star recruit out of Gainesville, stayed home, went to the University of Florida. Obviously didn't play much as a true freshman. Just got game action in 3 games. His redshirt freshman year, saw quite a bit more time, 529 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, 5 picks, and also ran the ball 51 times for over 400 yards and 3 more scores. So that's when we were really getting kind of a glimpse of what he could do, especially as a runner, as a ball carrier. And then finally, this past season, threw for over 2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns, 9 picks, ran the ball over 100 times for 654 yards and 9 scores. And I know it was really just one game, but after that first game of the season that he dominated, Matt, remember, he was getting Heisman talk. And again, it's 1 week, and we always do that early in the college season, and it usually doesn't work out very well. And unfortunately for Richardson, it didn't work out well. His play was inconsistent and ended up missing some time with an injury, but really top to bottom, a very good season, and it's got him where he is now. Matt, when we come back, we're going to dig into a little bit more of Richardson's game and his dynasty value as well. Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL draft prospects with deep dives into the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL franchise. Find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Matt, we've talked a lot about the strengths and really the weaknesses, the concerns for Anthony Richardson already. Obviously, the size, the strength, the athleticism. He can run the ball, an explosive playmaker. Are there any strengths that are kind of going under the radar that you've seen with Richardson? Anything that you like that maybe isn't obvious at first glance?
We kind of touched on it, and it's a massive overreaction to one day of throwing, but I'm at least open to the idea that he is improving his accuracy, improving as a passer. I mean, he's not just sitting around doing nothing since the season ended. I'm sure he's working with, specific coaches and quarterback gurus and people like that. And again, it's one day throwing to receivers he doesn't know, but I have a hunch that he's improving. Good enough? We don't know. I mean, he has a long way to go as a passer. I keep referencing, my time at the Combine. Greg Cosell sat down with us at the booth, and one of the things he said about Richardson was there's times where his tape is unwatchable. That was his word. I mean, that's how bad he can be at times. Misses people by 15 yards, So, and Lamar was guilty of this too. That I remember after Lamar's rookie year, I went back and watched every one of his throws. And one thing I noticed was he's more accurate than people give him credit for. But the problem is, of course, there's already it's set in your head that this guy is inaccurate enough. But when Lamar, especially early in his career, when he missed really badly. It wasn't just overthrew him by a fingernail or a hair. When he missed, it made it look worse. But they're incompletions nonetheless. It doesn't matter if you throw it in the seats or if you're half a yard short on the ball.
What I really liked about Lamar and what I think is, well, I don't know if we can compare Richardson in the same way, but Lamar to me improved throughout his college career as a passer. And certainly when he came into the NFL, he still had plenty of questions in that area. He still had some scouts calling him a running back and all of those silly things. But if you go back and watch throughout his college career, marked improvement from freshman season to the end of his career. We can't really judge Richardson in that way because it's really only this final college season that he has consistently been on the field. So, if you look at his late season splits, those are good. I believe it was the last 5 or 6 games. He had a very good touchdown to interception ratio. I think it was 9-2 in the last 6 games. That might be a little bit off, but showed some improvement down the stretch for sure. The weaknesses, again, we've talked about these. He's inconsistent. There's questions about his accuracy. Makes those dangerous throws. Maybe he's not reading the defense, not even seeing the defense. Maybe he's a little too confident at times in his arm, but he throws into double coverage, triple coverage. He makes those dangerous throws, and all of that really comes down to decision making. To me, like you said, to start the conversation, I think those are all things that I'm not going to assume that they're going to improve, but I think they can be improved in the right system. And you named plenty of quarterbacks recently that have shown that improvement once they get into the league. I want to look at
real quick before you do. I just pulled up Pro Football Focus's early draft guide. And there was a couple little nuggets here I thought were interesting. Is he only had 455 dropbacks in his college career. So he's new to this, and there's 2 things that they mentioned that I agree with where their quote was only lasers, hasn't mastered the art of when to take something off a throw. Well, that can change. I mean, to me, that's not it doesn't destroy your career. I mean, you can learn to throw with more touch or not always throw fastballs. And then the other thing they mentioned is his feet are all over the place. I mean, his footwork as a passer is very, very bad. But again, that's correctable. I mean, it's not just an inherent weakness you can't ever overcome.
And that's something we see with those quarterbacks who are able to run the ball as well, kind of happy feet at times.
Sure.
And again, we've seen that corrected, yet still have seen the quarterbacks who are able to run the ball pretty well, very well in some cases. I want to look at some dynasty value numbers, some potential landing spot numbers, but honestly, these things are going to shift a lot
Yeah, absolutely.
We're still fresh off the combine, and as people update their rankings, as we get some new ADP rolling in, we're going to see Anthony Richardson moving up the boards in really all of these. But let's look at, just for comparison's sake, we'll go ahead and take a look at it. His DLF rookie ranking right now, and this is Superflex, of course, is 8 overall. He is the quarterback 3, and his rookie ADP is 1.07, also the quarterback 3. So in that 7 to 8 range, that was Superflex, and that's pre-combine. How highly are you comfortable valuing Anthony Richardson right now in a Superflex league? And really, I think the main question here is, would he be your quarterback 1 in Dynasty right now?
Yes, he's my rookie quarterback 1, without question. I know we're going to talk about landing spots. I can't believe he gets past pick number 9, which basically means he's starting pretty soon unless he ends up in Seattle or Detroit, and then it's probably 1 year. But like we talked about with Fields last year, 2 years ago, Hurts, when he became the starter, they're so usable for fantasy in the meantime, while he figures things out, early career RG3, early career Josh Allen, these guys are highly useful. Cam Newton, these guys are highly useful, even if they don't figure it out. And as you mentioned, he should have a long leash career-wise, at least a couple years. I mean, unless he falls on his face to the Zach Wilson level. But even then, you'd get 2 years out of him probably.
Well, and he has that rushing floor that
exactly
Zach Wilson didn't have. So 7-8 range for Superflex rookie drafts. But we are both very
maybe lower than that. I'd have him even higher. I mean, because I definitely would take Bijan, Gibbs, Smith-Njigba, or Richardson as a conversation for me.
Oh, really? Okay. I guess I was assuming in Superflex, if he was your quarterback 1, that he would probably be 2 overall. And ultimately, that's kind of where I think we see him in those Superflex leagues.
Yeah.
You talked about it already. A bunch of teams in the top 9 that need a quarterback. Most of them have an immediate need at the quarterback position. 2 is Houston. 4 is Indy. 5 is Seattle. 6 is Detroit. 7, Las Vegas. 8, Atlanta. 9, Carolina. It does seem like Las Vegas will probably go the veteran route if they have that option. But I totally agree with you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't think Richardson falls past 9.
I don't either.
So thinking about these teams, what would be your favorite? What's your ideal Anthony Richardson landing spot here?
I mean, I love Seattle and Detroit from the perspective of both those teams are on the rise. They have good offensive lines. He wouldn't get rushed in, but selfishly, I want to be able to start him week 1 of next year, and I don't think you can do that in Seattle or Detroit. How about Indy, though? I mean, just install the Hurts offense that you brought over from Philly behind Quentin Nelson and the threat of Jonathan Taylor there with you. I mean, good luck stopping that run game.
I like that idea as well. I heard from during Will Levis's interview last week, he was asked, and it was a common question, which teams each player had met with. And of course, I think that's very noteworthy.
Yeah.
Levis has not met with the Colts at all.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah. So
wow.
I was surprised by that one. Of course, he's been a popular mock draft pick to the Colts. Let's finish up here, Matt, with where the experts are viewing Anthony Richardson. And again, all of these mock drafts are pre-combine. We'll have some new information. So just view this as a starting point, looking at where he was valued prior to the combine. Daniel Jeremiah had him 18 to Detroit. That's noteworthy because the Lions also have the 6th pick, as we already talked about. Lance Zierlein, 19 to Tampa. Mel Kiper, he was the highest on.
Yeah, a little ahead of the curve.
Richardson had him 9 overall to Seattle. That involved a projected trade. Matt Miller, 16 to Washington. Dane Brugler, 15 to Detroit. I think that involved a trade as well, I believe. And Danny Kelly, our buddy from the Ringer, 20th overall to Seattle. And again, we talked about Seattle. They're not getting him at 20, but they might get him at 5 overall.
Right.
I'm with you. Seattle and Detroit, I think, make a lot of sense. You give him that time to figure things out, to improve, to grow into the league, and then we see what he can do. So obviously a very fun prospect, someone who I had some major concerns with, but I'm coming around very quickly on Anthony Richardson.
Last team to throw out there is, what if Lamar goes to Atlanta and then Baltimore has all these picks, and that would be interesting too.
That would be, and they might have the 8 overall pick if Lamar ends up in Atlanta. That will do it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL. And I'm Ryan, MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.